Welcome, Bitcoiners! Sun, totally up, totally up. Bitcoin running with the biggest blocks we've ever seen. Time to celebrate with a coffee. But all that's left to do is talk about what's new, right? Hmm. Um, and Muslim Bitcoiner at, well, I'll do some good mornings first, right? Morning, Joe. Morning, Mick Timmy. Um, Muslim Bitcoiner, Assalamu alaikum, Nolan. Do you find the Orbitals NFT thing on BTC is a new attack vector? I think we should ignore it, right? Yeah, that's my say. No, I might not be correct, but before we get into the fakest news of the day, I'll give you my 2 cents, might be useful. So the argument originally, and as someone who participated in the block size wars back in the old days, I was in the room every single time, right? I was in the room when the New York agreement was signed at Consensus because I helped program Consensus. I was aware of everything going on, talking to the different parties involved. Here's what you have to remember. The number of the block size was not really the debate, right? The block size was kind of irrelevant in the end, or even at the time. The real debate was whether or not you hard fork and expose the network to the uncertainty and really get pushed by the commercial side of Bitcoin. Remember, we talk about on the show a lot how Bitcoin is not consumer technology. We have a feeling when we see consumer technology to see technology to count it as consumer technology. Remember, the driving force behind consumer technology is fail fast and break things. So when the merchants were telling the Bitcoin devs and the miners and the plebs and everybody, oh, you got to upgrade so that we can sell more stuff and our exchanges work better, it was really about whether or not Bitcoin absorbed the Silicon Valley consumer tech mindset or not. Now, the reasons why they didn't absorb the consumer mindset is because cryptography is not consumer technology. Cryptography exists in a world that has different forces at play than consumer technology. Think of a video game. If a video game is shipped and there's a problem, you send a patch. It's no big deal, right? But when you're dealing with money, the length of time the thing exists for is really where the value is. It's not it's not a fail fast and break things. It's survive long enough and build confidence and trust. So the block size was not the issue. The issue was the coordination, the push from consumer technologists, from Silicon Valley for the network to upgrade, to move faster and be cooler. But everyone had known that that had been tried many times against Bitcoin already. There was all kinds of experiments going on, which is to this day why I think Ethereum is a worthwhile, not anymore, but at the time it was a worthwhile endeavor because you had to experiment. You can't experiment on Bitcoin. So that there are tons of experiments was always a good thing, but not inside of Bitcoin. Bitcoin needed to go slower to preserve what it had because it worked. The block size was nothing to do with it. That's why the true debate about the block size wars was really the name of the party that won the block size wars, which was UASF, the user activated soft fork. And that tells you everything you need to know about the size of the blocks. It had nothing to do with the size. It was whether or not Bitcoin will be forced to hard fork because of the politicization of the big pockets behind it, or if users could perform a soft fork, which limited the damage to Bitcoin, limited the surface area of attack to Bitcoin to just that. Now, we live in a world where people are saying the size of the chain could become an attack vector. Well, Satoshi did talk about that, right? Satoshi bet that Moore's law and processing power would allow us to one day artfully keep a node in our pocket. And he predicted that future. So remember, Bitcoin does have a reliability, let's say, on consumer tech, the microchip level, but it's not necessarily a part of it. So I do see the potential of an attack vector way in the future. That's true. I don't want to deny that, right? If the block size if the whole blockchain becomes too large and outpaces the speed of processing development, maybe we're in an issue, but it's nowhere near there now. So have fun, guys. The block size doesn't matter. It's not really the question. The question is surface area of attack, appetite for change, appetite to fail fast and break things, which is non-existent in Bitcoin, and we don't want it. Consumer technology frames for Bitcoin. Consumer technology is fine, right? It's fine in its own right. but that's that. Um, this is what Justin says. Storage is cheaper, but it does appear to be slowing down. Yeah, it is. I mean, there are forces at play, but as far as I can tell, going on now isn't going to push up against those. I think this is changing some of the estimates of block size on the 10-year horizon, 15-year horizon, but I'm not too worried about it. So, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong, right? But the number of the block size is not important, I think. I think what's important is the fight between a corporate political body promoting an upgrade for Bitcoin versus the user activated soft fork movement, which was really about how we coordinate together, who's in charge, right? And that's why it was such a big win. That's why it was such a big win that the UASF people won in the summer of 2017, right? The number wasn't what you were going for. It didn't matter, right? It was the fight. And as far as I can tell, the good guys won, right? As far as I can tell, the good guys won. So, but we'll talk about it a bit more. But first, right, we got to talk about Moscow time. What's the fakest news I can find? Well, NBC, there's one from Fox, which is pretty strong. But this is in the example of that right-wing brainwashing, right? So I don't have enough of those, right? But this is a true clown world situation. So Seattle health officials blame the drug crisis on racism. That's what they think, right? So that's one. But now I will say that Fox does the thing that I accuse other networks of doing regularly. This is something someone said on the side. It probably didn't deserve a headline and to become the point of what the person said in this case. So that's what I saw. Anyway, I don't normally want to refute these, but that one, just because it's a bit out of the ordinary, I still see Fox News trying to give a dopamine hit to people who would say, "Oh, look at those stupid people in Seattle," right? Talking about how drugs and racism are the same. So anyway, but here's a much better clown world, right? You got to offer this one. This one's too funny. So, did you know that Hunter Biden is asking for a criminal probe into Trump allies for the theft of the data on his laptop? It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Way to go, Hunter. Awesome. So, today everyone is talking about this spy balloon, right? There's a spy balloon over America. And what's to be done with it, right? So, it looks like it still hasn't been shot down. It came from Canada, but they say it's really from China. We don't really know. This is a bit of a fog of war situation. But the thing that has most people reacting today is that nothing has been done about it, right? I heard somewhere that maybe some F-22s were deployed, but I still haven't seen it, and I still don't really know what's going on. So you got Wall Street Silver here saying, we already have multiple apps on our phones that spy on us for the Chinese. The spy balloon is not the problem. So everyone talking about this spy balloon thing. But it did make me think of something in the sovereign individual, which we love, right? We always love the sovereign individual. And there's a frame in the sovereign individual which talks about comparing the end of the 1500s and the climate of the time to what was going on in the 1990s. And or the end of the 2000s when the book Sovereign Individual was written. And he makes one important observation, right? The more effective sovereignties are in limiting defections and encouraging military effort, the more likely they are to prevail militarily. In warfare, the most useful value systems induce people to behave in ways that short-term rational calculation would rule out. No organization would mobilize military power effectively if the individuals it sent into battle felt free to calculate where their own best advantage lay and join in the fight or run away accordingly. So when you see this, right, this spy thing, and it looks like there was deals in place maybe, and that's why the balloon is allowed to be there. Some people saying Beijing, Biden had signed something, but we don't need to know the details of that, right? It reminded me, so forget about the spy plane and everyone wondering why we're not doing anything with it. Imagine you're an American if you're not, or whatever country you're from, and your country says you got to go fight in Ukraine, right? You got to go to Europe, and it's World War III. Now that worked no problem in World War One, two. It might work this time. I think there's a lot of people who might say, "Oh, Ukraine flag, give me a vax, and I'll go and get it done." Right there, I can imagine there's a lot of people there doing that. Right? I'll only fight if everyone's vaccinated. Right? There's people that are confused enough that that would be their logic. But would we get a scale of participation amongst Americans like we saw in World War II if there was another war? I think the answer is clearly no. Clearly no, right? A lot of the people who were so patriotic for America have been black pilled, have been red pilled, orange pilled, right? There's pills going around all over the place. And the coherence of the typical American and their appetite to follow their government or military is down across the board, right? People hated Trump, people hate Biden. They're generally the most hated people going on either side, right? Politicians in general are quite hated. And you can't imagine them having the power anymore, the oration power, even the brainwashing power, even the manipulation, the psyop power to conjure a force to go and support the American army at scale anymore. That's what I believe. I could be wrong about it. I could be wrong, but I feel like we're there. I feel like if they tried to start a draft in America today, it would not lead to the kind of protests we saw in the 1960s in America when they had the draft around Vietnam, because those were like tense and serious. I think if they tried today, it would be hilarious. Like it would be funny to even see this attempt. You got to go sign up for the draft. I think it would turn into one of the great clown show examples of this early part of the 21st century. I think it would be common. I think I would watch that show, watching people draft dodge, and it wouldn't be so serious. I think you'd get a lot of comedic levity out of it. But what it sort of reminded me of and got me thinking about was this malaise, right? And the malaise is what the sovereign individual underlines, right? They talk about how at the time people were sort of finished with religion and were so angry and upset. And he he underlines a few of these um, um, aspects. He says, nonetheless, the prevailing mood was one of deep gloom. This is common at the end of an era, as conventional thinkers sense that things are falling apart, that the falcon cannot hear the falconer, is the quote he uses. Yet their mental inertia is often too great to comprehend everything that's going on and how much change is actually afoot, right? And the the confusion of that time back then was really about managing all the myths that their society were built on were crumbling. So the myth that the medieval world was built on was chivalry, right? Chivalry. I'll do for you because I've sworn an oath, and I'll come and defend this field, and I'll come and defend this castle, and I'll do all these things because you're paying me. That's my job, right? I'm a knight, so I got to go and do it. You paid me to do it, so I'm going to do it. And there was no such thing as politics at the time. Everything was based on chivalry. And of course, the solutions they had to all kinds of problems, right, based on this chivalrous system, were now similar to what we see in politics. They were solutions to help conjure more chivalry, more duty to the system that were falling apart and helped add to the general disdain. And suddenly, chivalry was no longer this amazing thing. It became a joke. If you remember the book of Don Quixote, right? Don Quixote is like laughing at the previous era of chivalry. They turn it into comedy, right? They turn it into comedy. And it was all built off of things like, here's one of the quotes. It's driven only um, um, the realization that these folks were corrupt, right? So they sold indulgences from difficulty in exchange for, um, um, you know, new feasts, a new monk, like a new commune, right? So organizing a pilgrimage to the penitents, right? Found another monk place, right? All these things did little to improve any of the reasons why people were upset. It was just old solutions coming each time. And it's kind of the same, right? If you have political difficulty, campaign contributions, or special help on commodity trades, right, can help you, right? And we've seen it happen throughout the system that we live in. And that's the reason why back in those days, merchants were so quick to align with kings, because it opened up new opportunities for their businesses, right? So the fact that merchants almost everywhere in Europe spontaneously allied themselves to the monarch at the center as he maneuvered to consolidate authority is telling evidence that the nation state in its early form was good for business, right? It helped lift the burdens of commerce imposed by the landlords and the feudal lords, and was suddenly a new world of opportunities. You had the global markets, you had this capacity to move around and do stuff you couldn't do before. And from then on, right, the whole system changed almost overnight, right? We entered a whole new world. And the thing that sovereign individual underlines is this piece here, this malaise set in, right? Now, what did it end up creating, right? We saw that the old world of chivalry, based on a religious order in the feudal times, as well as an economic one, right? It was the economics of having a castle and farmland around it, ended up getting split into both politics and economics, right? It got split into politics and economics. And the split ends up um, being interesting for this simple reason, right? Even the word politics didn't exist. It didn't exist in this time, right? And what we know of politics now, like the concept of everyone following politics, was foreign to them. Everyone followed religion, everyone knew their feudal lord, everyone knew their king, but that wasn't politics, right? They listened to the courtly behavior, but courtly behavior is where chivalry was made and poetry came from there, and it was a whole cultural scene, but it wasn't politics, right? So the even word politics didn't exist, and it actually comes from an old French word, right? I don't know if you know this. It comes from an old French word that means opportunists and temporizers, right? So people who are in the right place at the right time and opportunistic, that's where the word politics actually comes from. So as this was going on, politics became the people who were benefiting from the change and the situation and consolidating power. And indeed, if you see where the House of Commons in Britain comes from, right, it comes in the 1600s and really forms as a result of this as just the normal people who got together to create a separate block from the lords of the feudal system. So the House of Commons, which is where our Congress comes from in America, right? In America, the Senate and the Congress are mirrors of the British lords, right? They don't have senators in Britain, they have lords. And below the lords are the commons, right? The House of Commons, the common people, because they could get elected what we call ridings, right? So we don't call it counties in the British system. We call it a riding because literally they were calculated by how far a horse could ride, right? So a riding. And so you had ridings all around England, and they're still called ridings today, right? When you win a seat, you win a riding in a Commonwealth system. I'm not sure about Australia, but I know in Canada we still call them ridings, right? Just like in Britain. So at the time, the order turned into these institutions, politics and economics, right? And one of the ideas that the sovereign individual tries to get across is that the saturation with politics today and the saturation indeed with economics are really the same saturation they had 500 years ago with the church. It's the exact same saturation. And here it's based on, just like this one was based on the myths of chivalry, the current one is based on the myths of democracy, right? So what does he say about the myths of democracy in this case? Right? He says basically this idea that voting, right, that voting can make a difference, will probably be seen as stupid in the future, as being chivalrous was seen 500 years ago, right? That the joke of Don Quixote, look at these old people, right, will become a joke in our times about politics. And we're seeing it now, this whole clown world thing, right? the disdain people have for the systems in place on either side, left or right, right? It's not really about political party. Now, there's people who can be activated in both that take it very seriously, right? There are groups, it seems, that have buttons that can be turned on and off, and they can go crazy and get going and be nuts, right? So this whole change is one of dramatic ones that we've experienced in our short time on earth living in the American system, right? I remember when I was a kid, the myths were all true, right? The myths were true about America and its greatness and all the things about it. And that's why I continue to underline that there is a part of the American spirit which is real, right? We all feel that. But the actual practice of the democracy now has become quite a bit of a joke, right? We've got the Hunter Biden thing, we've got the elections. It's the reason why, personally, I loved Donald Trump, but also love Joe Biden, right? Because it's actually changing the job. It gets one group to criticize the role and then another group to criticize the role. So if you take them together, right, if you take the people who criticized Trump and you take the people who criticized Biden, that's pretty much all of America have a recent very bad experience with the job of president and who the president is and their perception of it. And you had all Democrats thinking the 2016 election was a scam. Then you had all the Republicans thinking the 2020 election was a scam, right? That's why, indeed, we are Fetterman 2024 people all the way, all the way. We love Fetterman 2024, right? For those same reasons, because the actual institutions that we've come to know and love and respect over the years, our interpretation of them has totally changed, right? And that's why I've always said that there is a weakness for Bitcoin's potential in America because of American patriotism and because Americans are so in love with their country that is a thing that can actually hold Bitcoin back, right? I have always thought that the Chinese, who have this incredible history, have a totally different appreciation of their culture, wouldn't really tie in their political institutions and their money necessarily, right? They wouldn't take money and politics and put those forward as things to brag about, right? They brag about a lot of stuff in China, which is great, right? Which is great. They have a lot to be proud about. But the whole idea that these institutions that were created not too long ago would be the things they brag about is not really the case, right? And Chinese people have a certain advantage over Americans when it comes to understanding Bitcoin in that way. Now, plenty of Americans have shed that delusion. They've shed the myth that somehow America has this completely benevolent political system and that democracy is attainable through votes and voting makes all the difference. Now, I'm not telling anyone not to vote. I think you can get change from voting, and it's great that we can vote. And some of the institutions of democracy have certainly been absolutely beneficial. There's no way to deny it. But like any system, right? Just like fiat, right? Fiat had a lot of benefits at the beginning, but entropy set in. And when entropy sets into these systems, you end up getting to this malaise, right? You end up getting to this malaise. And that's why you get people who have these political, you have these people who have a political worldview that is now so tainted and probably can't be repaired, right? Probably can't be repaired. You see the Kanakawa the Great, who does one of the best thread. He's one of these guys on Twitter now that just does the best threads, right? There's all these people that are doing amazing threads. Caitlin Johnstone, we mentioned yesterday, Kate Oz, great threads. Doomberg has these great threads. Schellenberger, MD, has these great threads. Well, Kanakawa was taken off of Twitter for a little while, but he's back. And he's got another one here that follows the whole investigation from the war clandestine fella the other day, right? Saying basically just going through the biological weapon angle between the United States government, Ukraine, and Russia. Now, we still don't know. This is fog of war, right? I'm not here to tell you we can definitely know that what the Russians said was true, that America had bioweapons in Ukraine, right? I don't know that. These people are saying they have proof, but we know in today's world, very difficult to trust what you see on Twitter. Basically, you can't, right? We do our best to take the information and think about it, right, and chew on it a bit. and see if it fits with our worldview or not, or if it triggers us, or if there's any reason why we'd want to be skeptical about it and those things. But he gives a pretty interesting breakdown of exactly what happened. He does a follow the money analysis, which in general, I think predicts well, right? If you do a follow the money analysis and it makes sense to you after you've done the follow the money analysis, we can tell they work because it usually predicts where things are going, right? Once you understand the money situation, you could pretty much tell where it's headed. So he's done a follow the money analysis here, and it looks legit, right? But I'm not fact checking all of this stuff at all. But it looks legit. And it doesn't really matter whether or not it's legit. It still fits into the whole malaise around the political system on both sides, right? On both sides. That's what's important, that this is on both sides. It's happening to everyone. And now when you think about that, right, you think about that and put it in the context of what Munger said yesterday. Charlie Munger, I've been saying for a while that because Munger sounds like hunger, right, I think there's like a virus that you can actually call the Munger virus, right? It's when you hunger for something to change and there's a big problem and you can see we need this thing solved. He said it last year about inflation, right? Now he's saying it again about China today, right? He's saying, well, we should do what the Chinese did and ban Bitcoin. China had that one smart, he said, right? So it's one of those instances when you see there's a big problem, but you're just a little off on what the answer is, but you really need that solution, right? That's a Munger, right? It's like hunger, but a little different, right? So the Munger virus here, right? This is what he says. He says that Bitcoin is evil, he even said, right? It's evil. And he says that what we need is to take a lesson from the Chinese. So again, you can wonder why we're there, right? Wonder why we're there. Politics is already in question. And then you get people in the market saying things like that. Well, good news for us is that Doomberg, right, another one of these amazing need versus hunger, the Munger games, the Munger games. Yeah. So Doomberg, who we think is great, right? Some people are saying he's a psyop guy. Maybe, we don't know. But Doomberg, another Substack today, where he titled Gong Show. So he often puts a quote at the top. This one's from George Lucas. He says, "The secret to film is that it's an illusion." And then he goes into describing what's going on Wall Street today, right? What's going on Wall Street today? So he breaks down how much it's changed. And I'll read it to you, and then I'll give you my own warmonger. That's a good one. I like that. So here's what he says about Wall Street. As crazy as this might sound, it used to be that stocks traded based on the quantity and quality of the underlying company. Stock prices were generally forward-looking. It was understood that how a company had done in its recent weeks was instructive, both as to its prospects and to the quality of its management. Investors would analyze companies for their future profit potential, compare their assessment with that of the market using simple tools with price to earnings multiples, and make buy or sell decisions accordingly, right? And then he goes into all the different metrics there were, earnings per share, right? They paid close attention to shareholder dilution, price per share assigned by the market. And there was a sort of normal, natural policing mechanism in the markets. But what he describes as happening now is the debasement of our capital markets, right? And he gets into the AMC story and what's going on with that. So I'm not going to go that far to the AMC story. All I'm going to say is that the myth that somehow what Munger is espousing here, right? Go to the political structure, take inspiration from another political structure, that is in this case China, and start manipulating your economy to get a better outcome, is part of this myth that like this stuff is even controllable, right? That you can actually quantify economics and politics in such a mathematical and targeted way. We know now that the Fed Reserve, for example, is really running a psychological operation. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. They've got to force people to get the economy going. We know that Bitcoin is a psychological commodity. Dollars are a psychological commodity. The advantage we have as Bitcoiners is that it's easier to mobilize our understanding through Bitcoin of a better future. It's easier for our brains to imagine the world working and painting a very accurate or at least inspirational view of what's possible versus the other system, which is clearly just a bunch of dead ends. It's the malaise again, right? It's the same malaise that set into religion that offered up ridiculous answers to the problems of the times is happening again, right? We're getting ridiculous answers to the problems of our times. Absolutely insane, right? Absolutely insane. And I've often likened it to making Wall Street into a porno, right? So the whole point of Wall Street is risk, just like the whole point of politics is making decisions of consequence, right? Risky, get it right, get it wrong. Wall Street was supposed to be a place where risk was real and you could lose or win, right? But that gave the discipline that Doomberg was talking about here. When you remove that with the psychological commodity of the dollar and you put it more into the political realm, you invite the corruption we've seen. You invite the nepotism we've seen because it becomes the only way to sustain the system. In the end, what they turned Wall Street into, what was supposed to be a risky place, they turned it into a pornography film. It's a porno, right? There's no real risk to participate, right? There's no real risk. You're not going to get a consequence of a human life to take care of. You're not going to get the consequence of a disease, right? It's just a little dopamine hit, right? Bam. And that turned whatever this was supposed to be into just a myth, right? It's just a myth. And worse, Wall Street, what should have been a place where there was real risk, turned into a porno, but the risk is still out there, right? There still are risks in the world. So you can only hide it for so long. If you're not actually taking care of the problems, you're going to be in big, big trouble, right? And we see it now. So that risk, all of that risk being turned into something else, leads to things like what we see in Japan, right? What's happening in Japan is, this is from Wall Street Silver, right? The Bank of Japan lost $68 billion in December, right? We covered it the whole time, how much bond buying, how much currency manipulation was going on there. And it turned into $68 billion and it didn't do anything, right? Wall Street Silver underlines, just getting started. Bank of Japan is completely trapped. Japan is a preview of what will likely happen and the USA in the next few years. You can't taper upon that psychological engine that I'm mentioning that has reached the same sort of dead end as here, right? It's having trouble moving forward. And because of that, we're in this world of malaise and difficulty and what do we do next? And, you can see even that, solving the problems of our times. Here's a super fake news from Reuters, right? Super fake news. Mexico looks to a giant solar park in the desert to assuage the carbon concerns. An oilfield rando chimes in, yes, that's what tops the concern chart in Mexico. Carbon, right? It's carbon, right? Now, we know there is no such thing as Mexico. Right? It's not a country. Right? It's a place, it's geography, but the politics of Mexico are 100% corrupt. The cartels bought it a long time ago. A long time ago. It's not really a country, right? The way we would recognize a country. But it still might be where we're headed in the future. Right? It still might be where we're all headed, right? Now, the cartels themselves, as predicted in The Sovereign Individual, will become a major global force, right? These guys have their own armies. They can coordinate. They can run things. They have way more capacity than nation states in some sense now, right? In some sense now. Nation states continue to be bogged down by the politics. I mean, look at the whole spectacle yesterday that went on and everyone talking about it today, kicking people off a committee and what is this person on the committee for and what is that person on the committee for. Now, I don't care about any of that stuff, right? What I know, and I will say I am an Ilhan Omar supporter, not for anything she thinks about, not for any of her political ideas. There's one reason why I support her. She gets small donations. And therefore is only beholden to her actual followers, not larger donors, right? Like a Jim Jordan, the Republican Jim Jordan, he gets a shit ton of money from Google and he can F off, right? I won't support him for anything. He's completely not on our side. Now, and I might even agree with his politics more, right? I might agree with a lot of his policy decisions way more than I would ever agree with Ilhan Omar. I disagree with her on almost everything. almost everything. I still support her simply because if you do a follow the money analysis, she's the only one of any of those people who lives off of small donations. She was the only person in Canada when we had the ridiculous trucker thing a year ago, right? And there was this one journalist from one of our ridiculous fake news outlets in Canada who tried to shame a small business owner for giving money to the protesters and thereby becoming a terrorist. And so this journalist tried to shame a small time person, right? Only one person stood up to that journalist, Omar, from a totally different country, said, "Come on, you idiot journalist. This is just a lady. Get the hell out of here," right? Couldn't have said it better myself, right? I'll never not support Ilhan Omar just because of that. And again, I totally disagree. 100% disagree with her politics. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Because she's not actually beholden to the corrupted financial system that's pushing our politics forward. I can at least know where she's coming from and agree with her or disagree with her. But nevertheless, her support comes from a place that I recognize. It's not the pornography side of huge donations, huge corruption, and all of those things, right? So that's a little more reason to want to be, like I said, I don't support her politics, right? I wouldn't vote for her necessarily either, right? That's not also what I'm saying. I don't wish for her to be a congressman necessarily, but I wish for more people to be funded like her, right? Way more, right? Way more. That to me says she's got a lot more, credibility and authenticity, which is hard to have these days, right? Credibility and authenticity, not easy. So all this to say, we've got myths that are at the source of these systems, right? And I don't know what myth is at the bottom of Bitcoin. It might even be the myth of what do you call it? Like freedom, free will, right? It might be a myth, right? Free will might actually be a myth. But nevertheless, Bitcoin allows us to make more consequential personal decisions. So whereas this has become a pornography, Bitcoin forces you to make decisions of importance to yourself. Remember, economics is really just the system of making choices, right? People say macroeconomics and microeconomics. I'm not sure, right? Not sure if it's that way. Um, um, I've always thought of economics as just what we call, the micro, like the personal choices we make. I've always thought of macroeconomics as politics, right? It's just politics, right? I wouldn't want to distinguish economics into two fields like academia does, because I see one as purely politics, right? Macroeconomics to me is one subject, it's politics. It is, as the old French word says, opportunists and temporizers, right? They're the same thing. Bitcoin Graffiti says, myth might not be the right word. Maybe illusion is better. Yeah, I think so. The illusion piece that George Lucas said and was quoted by Doomberg is probably the more accurate one. I used myth just because that's what was in the sovereign individual. But indeed, the word illusion probably fits correctly. Bitcoin myth is self-sovereignty. Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, it could be that. Truth and narrative. Anyway, but the point is, we don't really need to know what it is, right? Maybe one day, and we've talked about it here. My book, The Satoshi Wedding Murders, does talk about what entropic systems can come into Bitcoin, right? I conclude, I'm not sure if I'm right. It's just what I came up with. What would influence Bitcoin? In my story, it's life creation, markets, right? The turning of the creation of life into an economic component and making it the reason why we move forward. So in my world, that could be what changes our need for Bitcoin. But that's just me trying to think out loud and come up with the reason. Not sure if it's right. So the point is, this malaise that we see the malaise in politics everywhere. We're not need to go fight World War III. It ain't going to happen. Right? No one's going to do that. Wall Street, is it going to fix itself? Is the porno of Wall Street going to suddenly get better? Of course not, right? They're combined. They're joined at the hip. They're going to live together and they're going to die together. And that's why, right, the malaise piece is so important, because That's what really led to the mega political change, right? That's what the sovereign individual describes, mega politics. The mega politics are the malaise causes people to want something different. They replaced religion with politics because it made the most sense at the time. And now the malaise has set in again. And not Republicans, not Democrats, right? None of them are going to be able to help you. They're not offering any solutions. They're asking you to go on another pilgrimage. They're asking you to walk barefoot in the snow. They're asking you to start another nunnery. They're asking you to start another monastery. None of it is going to solve the problems. We have an energy problem, right? A massive energy problem. We have a food distribution problem around the world, right? And in general, we have an inability amongst the vast majority of people on Earth today to imagine a better future. They can't do it, right? How many pessimists are out there now? And I understand why they're pessimists. They're getting barraged with psyops all day long. They're getting barraged with negative news. They're getting barraged with the limiting factors of human potential to blossom and flourish. Right? They only see the the limitations. Right? As P. Man Van says here, latest one is the 15-minute cities, exactly, right? And that's why this choice coming back into the equation, economics, right? Really about choices. It's really about, like, forget what dictionaries say and academic books say about economics. In the end, it's just personal choices. Right? It's the choices you make. Buy it, don't buy it, consume it, don't consume it, need it, don't need it. So all of these things are going to be one of the reasons why Bitcoiners take over, right? We understand people need energy, and we want the energy for ourselves, right? So we need it, right? Everyone needs energy, and no one else is actually talking like that. Nobody, right? No one in Wall Street. They're worried about what Munger said about what's going on in China and Bitcoin, and who knows, right? 99-year-old guy, and it is. Come on, I don't want to laugh at anyone physically and all that, but watching him search, like the warmonger, right? Watching him search for answers with his glasses, and they're thick, and his eyes are googly and like exploding out of his head, and he looks like kind of like a frog or something. Um, we need, it's great. It's revolting. It's revolting. And these guys, they can search with Munger's glasses all they want. They're not going to find the answer, right? And that's why Bitcoin, because it offers solutions to our imagination to unlock a better future, is just going to keep attracting people, right? And Brian says diet and lifestyle will make Bitcoiners the only ones left able to pay attention. It could be. If you look at the declining, I don't care about the birth rate for a second, just the copulation, right? I said Wall Street's a porno. Well, yeah, and pornography does what, right? Keeps people from doing the real thing, right? I often say, well, they made Wall Street a porno. Bitcoin's going to teach them what it's like to for real again, right? It ain't what they think. It's different. It ain't that easy, right? It's not the same as, put on a porno. It's different. And I think Bitcoiners understand that, right? So, I'm not one of these people, ban pornography or anything like that. Like, what are there's some people who need it, right? What are they going to do? But indeed, we need people who are doing it for real. And if I believe anecdotally what I hear, right, it's like 1% of men are getting all the women now on the social media apps, and women are just, going along with it, I guess. And then you've got the AI coming with that stuff too. So things are changing, right? Things are changing, and if you change things, from a sexual level, right, you're going to get a very, very like, these incels are the real thing, man. I would be more worried about the incels, not for violence or things like that, but that's a case too. I just mean about their potential to change tomorrow. If someone has an epiphany and it's sexually based, it's hard to stop that, right? People won't really listen to anything anymore. You could tell them whatever you want, it ain't going to work. So there you go. Let me see. I missed some of these stuff today. There we go. I missed all these ones. Muslim Bitcoiner. Fail of the Crusades and bubonic plague. How this impacted the chivalrous 1500 to birth the Enlightenment area. I'm not really sure, but I would assume it's some of the major concerns of the time, and that politics wasn't, or that the church wasn't handling. Um, Instead of democracy, you should say civics. We became, could be, yeah, it's not a bad. You are correct, Rizzo. As usual, Rizzo, correct. The definitions are similar. Yeah, you're right. Chivalry, the medieval knightly system with its religious, moral, civics, the right and duties of citizenship. Yeah, I guess they did sort of persist. But civics still believe, just like chivalry, right, as a myth, supported the system. Indeed, civics did support the political and economic system. Yeah, so I think they could. Yeah, I think they could definitely mix in. But, it doesn't change the fact that on either side of the spectrum, there's very few people around willing to see this thing go forward, right? How many people are still out there saying, like, besides Munger, right? Not a lot, which is a good news, right? Which is the good news. Treaty of Westphalia, yeah, that was already after the fact, though. The stuff had already come to play, right? The changing, the consolidation of power under a king. It hadn't happened everywhere at once, but indeed, the Treaty of Westphalia crystallized the whole thing. Right? Crystallized the whole thing. It's good to examine what one spontaneously seeks to satisfy the desire. Yeah. Examine hunger, spontaneously seeking to fill your mouth. Ah, I remember. This is our I Ching. Bitcoin will win when people are more afraid of the dollar than they are of Bitcoin. That's really well said, Brendan. Brian Peterson. I like that. Doomberg, love his heart, said he would buy Bitcoin if it went to 5K. Not quite a Bitcoiner yet. Yeah, I agree. But he's still worth following, and I love his threads and his Substack pieces. Can't believe the lifespan of Munger Buffet, Def Summerton, and Buffett. Yeah, 99. Well, I had a 102-year-old grandmother. It looks like she is supported by Soros. She does not appear to be a small donor candidate. Oh, is that true, Brian? Well, I thought she was, but I could be wrong. As I said, I'm not doing any. I made the conclusion that she was a small donor person simply because of her defense of this person, and other people said, like, I think Glenn Greenwald made the point that she is um, a small donor, and therefore it makes sense in his worldview. Again, he wasn't supporting her, although he does, right? He is anti her getting kicked off whatever that committee thing is. But remember, I don't care about who's on the committee and who got kicked off. That everyone's fighting about committees and not about everything else going on in America is kind of what this is all about, right? And which is good, right? So people getting triggered by them, fine. Remember, it's bread and circuses, as Brian says, right? Yeah, yeah. Pristine collateral, as Foss likes. That's what I love, the pristine collateral line. All right, team. That's all I got for today. I'll see you tomorrow. It'll be the weekend. Have a great Friday, and send me some Moscow time stories if you come across any.